Let's now look more closely at the characters that Lawrence has created. First we have Elizabeth Bates, who starts out as just a woman, but who finally gets a name after her father's visit. Elizabeth is described as tall, imperious, handsome, with exactly parted black hair. We sense that she is pragmatic and precise, and we also see, repeatedly, that she is bitter. She is frustrated with her drunken husband and unhappy in her marriage. She doesn't seem to belong to the world of coal mining. Her language is refined even more so than her father's. Though she calls herself a fool for having married him and coming to that dirty hole, she's still a devoted mother. She constantly protects her children and cares about them. She makes sure her young son isn't playing in the stream. She doesn't interrupt the children's playing with her worrying. And she lets the children sleep without knowing the anguish that their father is dead. Walter Bates, her husband, is in many ways her opposite. Though he never appears in the story as a living character, his presence looms, as all of the other characters' thoughts are on him, and the plot is weighted down by his family's waiting for him. His major characteristic is that he is an alcoholic. It's not uncommon for him to go to the pub to drink, instead of coming home to his family, who are waiting to eat their supper until he arrives. He appears to be uncaring and sly, making sure none of the family members see him sneaking by. He also keeps a portion of his earnings to spend on drink, when his wife could probably use it to spend on food and clothing for her family. Physically, he is described as handsome, strong, with blonde hair and a mustache. Like Lawrence's mother, Elizabeth may have been attracted to his physique. Though he is either absent or inanimate throughout the story, he still provides the catalyst for change in Elizabeth's character. The children are in varying degrees similar to their father and their mother. First, John, the 5-year-old boy, has both his mother's black hair and his father's indifference and self-absorption. Even his clothes are a smaller set, made from his father's. And like his father, he complains about the darkness in the house. Annie, on the other hand, has a few similarities to her father. However, though her hair has been blonde like her father's, it's darkening, perhaps showing that she's growing closer to her mother. She's sensitive and attached to her father, but she's aware of and accepting her mother's critique of him. After her father's death, she may begin to resemble her mother more and more. Walter's mother provides a foil for Elizabeth. She is emotional where Elizabeth is controlled. Though she laments her son's bad habits, she also indulges them. She remembers him fondly as a child, calling him a good boy, but she seems to have little awareness of the reality of his adult life. As a living connection to the past, she represents the Walter as he was, and not as Elizabeth perceives him now. However, as Elizabeth realizes, she may not have really known him in the present. She now will never know him as he was previously, as a boy. It's another side of Walter Elizabeth will never get to know. As mentioned, Elizabeth's father establishes her middle-class origin, and also foreshadows Elizabeth's widowhood. Though his beard is gray, placing him close to the age of Walter's mother, who is repeatedly described as old or elderly, his character looks forward into the future, whereas Walter's mother looks into the past. The symbols and the imagery of the short story bring us closer to an understanding of its themes. First, there is the obvious chrysanthemum, from the title. Though this flower has a lot of negative associations, marking the start of Elizabeth's husband's alcoholism as well as his death, they also represent positive or happy times, such as her wedding and the birth of her first child, though these could also be interpreted as negative events, marking the start of Elizabeth's bitterness and unhappiness in her marriage, and also marking the difficulty and pain of childbirth. We see that Elizabeth can still enjoy them, as she places the flower against her cheek early in the story, that she tucks it into her apron band, and that she has bouquets of them in her parlor. Obviously, she chooses to have them around her, even if she protests to her daughter that they don't smell beautiful. Elizabeth's mixed feelings about the flower could show her mixed feelings about life and death. Both are her masters. She fears one and submits to the other. Another recurring motif is darkness. The story begins as the sun goes down and ends in the middle of the night. This could signify the coming of death, but it's also in the darkness of the parlor, as Elizabeth looks at the body of her husband, that she has her epiphany. On the flip side, light and lamps are also mentioned just as frequently. Both Walter and John prefer the lamplight to the dusk, and Annie is drawn to the light of the fire. It's the lamplight that reveals Elizabeth's third pregnancy, and it is by candlelight that she's able to see her husband's body. And when the darkness of that night lifts, it's by the morning light Elizabeth's future will begin. Suffocation seems to be a minor element of the story, but it shows its significance in the fact that that's the method by which Walter dies. Elizabeth can also be seen as suffocating. She's confined to a house that's being clawed down by a vine, and her life in this small mining town is limited. Her and her children's possibilities are being strangled by their environment and Walter's drinking habits. Finally, the mention of shadows, fire, and nature imagery parallel the life-giving and life-taking aspects of dark and light. Shadows suggest ghosts and only traces of people. Fire can bring warmth and light, but also threatens real danger. The nature imagery reflects the determinism of much realist and naturalist writing, both the idea that nature is indifferent to struggle, and also that one's natural environment predetermines one's fate. Two major themes of the short story are the isolation of the human soul and the nature of love. Elizabeth comes to an existential moment, recognizing the otherness of her husband, and how utterly separate she is from him. Though she thought she knew him, she never could really see into his soul and recognize his true being. The nature of love is seen in relationships between parents and children, as well as between husband and wife. This theme is seen elsewhere in Lawrence's fiction, notably in the novel entitled Sons and Lovers. The mental gulf that separates Elizabeth and Walter shows his interest in exploring the tension, conflict, and lack of connection that Lawrence associated with relations between the sexes. However, relationships between parents and children are much closer. Elizabeth cares for and protects her children, and Walter's mother is fond and indulgent with her son. However, Elizabeth must associate the child inside her with her marital relationship rather than her maternal relationship, for when she apprehends Walter as other, she says the child inside her felt like ice, something apart from her. D.H. Lawrence was a firm believer in marriage, though he always thought it meant more than quiet security and cozy routine. He talked of a dynamic blood polarity. He believed that one should be true to his blood and instincts, and as such, two married people would be fiercely separate in their dynamic blood polarity, like two eagles in midair, grappling and whirling. You can fit together the pieces of evidence from the story to support one of these themes, or you can just as easily discover a new expression of theme as you build your interpretation.